At the end of the 15th century, the Spanish navigator Christopher Columbus sets off for India by an unknown route for Europeans. As you know, Columbus did not reach India but stumbled upon the islands of the Caribbean basin, which he called the West Indies. He thought he had arrived in India from the other side, or at worst, found a way to China or Japan. After 1 year, military and workers reached West Indies bringing weapons, livestock, seeds. Europeans started colonization of America. In the next 250 years, local population was forced from their native lands and numerous tribes were enslaved. The discovery of a new world attracted people from all over Eurasia who were seeking a different life, escaping poverty, hunger, and persecution for various reasons. The leading European powers of that time, France, Spain, and Great Britain, established their colonies in America and began extracting gold, tobacco, cotton, and other resources from the continent. Money flowed into Europe like a river. By the middle of the 18th century, 13 British colonies on the east coast of North America united to resist the metropolis and declared their independence from Great Britain. Thus, the United States of America were established, and they promptly started expanding towards the eastern region of the continent. African slaves, forced labor, main driving force, US economy for decades, especially in the southern part of the country, remained unchanged. The struggle of southern planters against the industrial northern states for power led to the Civil War. In 1865, the northern states emerged victorious and slavery was abolished in all of them. Now the fuel for the country's industrialization was rapidly replenished by cheap labor, former slaves, debtors, and tens of millions of immigrants who continued to come to the continent in pursuit of the American dream. The final internal issue the states had to solve on their way to economic Olympus was what to do with the indigenous population, the Indians, who were still fighting for their lands in the Wild West and obstructing gold mining and the expansion of the railway network. The question was resolved indirectly. By the late 19th century, due to the mass shooting of the American bison, the Indians lost their main livelihood. Exhausted by hunger, Indians forced to move to reservations due to lack of food scarcity. After solving internal problems, the US has begun the path to global domination, greatly helped by the two biggest wars in history, which played a crucial role in shaping their position. The initial settlers of America were the Spaniards. Therefore, it was the silver peso, known as the dollar in Spain, that became the most widely used currency in trade between the Spanish Empire and Latin America. On the southern continent, there were so many silver mines that Spain could mint coins much more than any other country in the world. Thus, dollar rapidly became a payment method not only in Spanish colonies but also in all other colonies on mainland until 1792. By the time of the Declaration of Independence of the United States from Great Britain, the silver dollar was literally used in all states, so the founding fathers took the path of least resistance and made the dollar the currency of the new country. Due to low base effect, US economy grew rapidly, leading to shortage of silver and gold coins for covering goods and services. Therefore, along with coins, states began to issue paper dollars. The freedom of lending and entrepreneurship has led to the emergence of banks in each state, and each bank started printing its own dollars. In the 19th century, banks issued excessive banknotes to cover military expenses, resulting in only 1/3 of the dollars backed by gold and silver by the end of the Civil War. The government has realized that a decentralized banking system not only weakens the dollar, but also leads to regular stock market crises. Therefore, in 1913, the United States created its own central bank, the Federal Reserve System. And just in time, because 1 year later the First World War broke out in Europe, and it was at that moment that the dollar was able to truly unfold. At the war's onset, the expenses of the leading European powers grew rapidly. To cover them, England, France, and Germany printed money, causing their quantity to no longer correspond to the gold held in their reserves. The USA did not rush to join the war. Additionally, they started actively lending to England and France, thus reducing their external debt. As a result, by the end of World War I, the United States issued loans for $10 billion, of which 7 were spent by Europeans on the purchase of American weapons. Additionally, numerous companies provided by gentlemen preferred to keep their money not in war-torn Europe, but in reliable banks in America. By the beginning of the 1920s, the US economy had accumulated half of the world's gold reserves. Financial incentive, invention of electricity, automobiles, radio, and cinema led to overheating of economy. The Great Depression struck the country, and it's unclear how long the state's economy would have recovered from the crisis pit if not for the Second World War. The scenario repeated. While all parts of the globe were consumed in war, the US made efficient business decisions. Without entering into combat operations at the initial stage, the states provided regular assistance to allies through the Land Lease program, which was by no means free. Great Britain, for instance, recently settled with the states for this aid in 2006. However, the key point is that due to active lending to Europe and the provision of a reliable Fort Knox for storing other countries' gold bars, the United States amassed 3/4 of the world's gold reserves by the war's end. Therefore, it is not surprising that in 1944, in the small town of Bretton Woods, the United States proposed to the whole world to use the dollar in international settlements. Well, what? Partners will settle their debts to the USA at an unknown time. Gold is too heavy to carry back and forth across the ocean, but here is a reliable and convenient reserve currency. Well, if they promise free exchange of dollars for gold, why not? Sounds good, but there's some catch. And since then, something clearly happened, since today, the government of the states does not change the dollars for metal. And the following happened. After the end of the Second World War, the economy of Europe began to recover and gradually become richer. Gold prices on free markets were also rising, and exchanging dollars for gold at a fixed rate set by the US government was becoming increasingly advantageous. French President Charles de Gaulle was the first to give in. In 1965, he sent a ship to the States, bringing 750 million cash dollars, followed by a second ship of the same kind. Reluctantly, the USA settled and Fort Knox lowered by 1,650 tons of gold. Other countries also decided to exchange their dollars, and soon the gold reserves in the USA decreased by more than 2.5 times. Therefore, in 1971, US President Richard Nixon announced that the dollar is no longer tied to gold, and those who did not have time were late.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
It was evident that over the years, the volume of printed dollars far exceeded the gold reserves of the United States. After 5 years in Jamaica, the countries agreed that exchange rates are now determined, like prices for other goods, in the markets due to supply and demand. And gold also became a commodity and ceased to serve as a means of payment. However, despite this default, no one refused the dollar, as it has been involved in all international settlements for several decades. The dollar is deeply ingrained in the global economy, so subsequent crises starting in the US were exported to other countries. With unlimited emission approval, the USA has maximized the printing press after getting the green light. In 2005, the American economy was valued at $6.5 trillion. The money supply has grown by 300%. Do you know the extent of the increase in American production during this time? At 170%. At this rate, one might think that the dollar is a pyramid that will eventually collapse. But this is of course unlikely. Replacing one reserve currency with another, even over decades, is an impossible task. And the new Bretton Woods obviously will not happen soon, unless it is the Black Swan. Thus, it's no surprise that in the past 20 years, 50% of global trade has been in USD, with no expected trend changes. The stability of the dollar against other currencies makes US Treasury debt the most reliable investment in the world. Just think about it. The country's debts have doubled over the past 15 years, but financiers consider their purchase a risk-free investment. How is that possible? Everything is elementary. Who are you more willing to lend money to? To a poor or rich acquaintance? The answer is clear. The entire world is investing in the dependable US economy, as there are few alternatives. Even the trade deficit of the US doesn't change anything. The US sells fewer goods and services than they consume. But what do they pay for it? Correct, such a popular dollar. And since he is so necessary to everyone, it would be nice to have him at hand, thinks the central bank of each country. Thus, the dollar makes up over 50% of all other currencies in global reserves. It appears that the strength of the dollar is rooted in public trust in its dependability, backed by American societal institutions. And the precarious position of the dollar, which I described to you, is not its disadvantage, It is the difficulties that the whole world will solve sooner or later. As former US Treasury Secretary John Connally once said, "The dollar is our currency, but your problem." And ponder for a moment, if you were printing the money that the entire world utilizes, how rapidly would you go bankrupt? Maybe never?